Hi, SuperCon fans. Shane back here, and I have the honor and pleasure of being joined by Brian B-Man Baron Babendererde.
Babendererde.
I did get it after a stutter. I promise you I practiced this. And but hey, Brian, thank you for being with us. I was excited when I got your email after Russell sent out. I spoke to Russell. I said, Russell, is there people that you feel would be interested in this convention? And I'm glad he brought Trevor Mueller, who I interviewed earlier today, and you to the table. And I'm really excited about this. We're passionate about promoting creators that others might not have exposure to. It's a big part of SuperCon, and so welcome and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is
So,
kind of a first for me doing a virtual con, so it's interesting. I mean, participating in this way, so this is great.
yeah, it is. It's necessity is the mother of all invention, right? So when we had to cancel the physical convention, we looked at what can we still do to engage our fan base and to still provide for our nonprofits. So we decided to try this, and we'll see. Right now everything seems to be going good, and I hope we get fan interaction as strongly as social media is telling us there'll be. So it's going to be a lot of fun, I think.
Yeah.
Brian, what brought you to this world of writing for comics and for video games? What was your decider? What brought you to this?
Well, about almost 30 years ago, I got into working in video games, quite by accident. I was a college student who was taking classes in artwork with computers in 1990.
Wow,
And
early.
yeah, so we were working on Amigas. We had very crude tools, but a local company here in the suburbs of Chicago kind of came to the school looking for people that were interested in doing that. And I was the only student who was, instead of making, scanning in photos and retouching them, or making design shapes of circles and squares and stuff, I was animating giant robots shooting at each other. So they're like, that's the person we want. Um,
That's
and
awesome.
Yeah, so I jumped into working on video games right away, and I started as an artist. Started doing backgrounds and sprite animation for games on TurboGrafx 16 and Super Nintendo, Genesis, those platforms, the 16-bit revolution back around 91. Um,
Yeah.
but I quickly moved into game design. So I started as an artist, but quickly moved into determining how the game works and how it plays, and that led into determining what the story was, and that got me into writing. I had always been writing on my own, but never professionally, and so games became a way for me to tell stories that combined writing and visuals. Um, and I went on to do adventure games and role-playing games that were more story focused.
Yeah.
Um, and One of the things that I always wanted to do though was comics. And after working in video games for like 20 years, was I started to realize I'm not really doing much art anymore. I'm just working on story and script and game designs, the nuts and bolts of how much damage does this thing do when it hits that, and you know I was getting to flex my storytelling muscles. I was getting to create worlds, fantasy worlds, and populate them with characters and stuff like that. But I wasn't really doing any artwork anymore. So I remembered how much I always had wanted to do comics. I'd always loved the medium and was like, hey, that's a way that would get me back into drawing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
around 2001, I started working on a comic book, and I've been working on comics and video games, just bouncing back and forth between the two ever since.
So when you talk about the story of the video game, I've had the opportunity to speak to a number of different creators over the years, both as a fan up at FallCon and SpringCon up in Minnesota and OCon down in Omaha, and then through our own convention. So people talk about, I know the story before the character, and I know the story after the character. When you're creating, are you that invested in the characters? Do you create like a Bible for the characters, or how do you
Yeah.
process that?
So my big thing with game design was creating those Bibles. For
Hmm.
a long time, back in the Super Nintendo era, You might be working on a game that had like 4 people working on it, a couple artists, a programmer, maybe a couple more people to work on sound. And as the games grew more elaborate and bigger, when we moved to CD-ROMs, and all of a sudden we could have 10,000 cartridges on one, on one game disc. The games, they got way more complicated, and so we started putting together much more elaborate game bibles. Working on fantasy worlds, science fiction worlds, led immediately into, well, we need a whole world bible for how this whole world works, especially for something like an expansive role-playing game. And that world bible isn't just about the world, and it's about the people that inhabit it. So those characters that inhabit the world, it's going to be their stories that are going to be being told, and those characters need to be interesting characters, and they need to have a starting place and a place to journey to, by the time the story is complete. So yeah, even today when I'm working on a comic book project, I'm working on a science fiction project right now, and I probably spent more time working on the character bibles and the story, the world bible, than I'm actually going to be spending on drawing it.
Wow.
So because you want that world to exist and have everything about it work together, so that when the reader's actually reading the project or playing the game, you may not put all of that information into your story or game, but it's there. It informs the story and the details. Did I lose you?
So, no, you're fine. Did we freeze up for a moment?
Yeah, we
Brian?
froze up for a second.
Yep. So let's go back to that, and I apologize for that. Let's go back to that. You were talking about you want to make the world real. You want the characters real, the world to exist. So how much, you said, more into that than you're actually going to spend time in the comic. Is that for continual? So if you want to do another volume, introduce more characters, you have reference, or is it just for the holistic feel of the world?
I think it's more about the holistic feel of the world. I think that's actually a really good way to put it. It's like, for example, in the project that I'm working on right now, there's details about this world that I've typed up and put into the Bible. They're not necessarily in the story, but they're going to inform how things look. They're going to inform the designs for the mechanical things in this world. They're going to influence how the characters speak to each other and how they reference things. And sometimes that's just an added layer of detail that isn't incredibly important to the plot, but the reader understands it. The reader picks up on that. They understand that there's more depth to here than they've actually, than it is actually in the surface story. And yeah, it does lead to me then wanting to, wouldn't it be cool to go back and tell a story that involves that thing that I kind of mentioned but didn't really talk about?
Right.
Yeah. And also this book, when it eventually comes out, will have a couple pages in the back, just dedicated to some stuff that is about the world creation. Just, it's a science fiction thing, so there'll be schematics of the ships that I made, and information about how the engines work and stuff like that. It's not going to be in the story, but it's cool stuff. And
and we eat that up.
Yeah, as a reader, I love that stuff. Sometimes, you don't want to slow the story down to interject a bunch of exposition all of a sudden, like, as is commonly known, our engine runs on blank blank. But it's fun stuff to put into the back of a book or put into a world Bible that a reader made for readers. So it's cool.
Yeah, I think one of the great things about sequential art, and storytelling is that so much of it's done off the panel, right? That the reader draws from their own experience, their own imagination to fill in, whereas movies and TV and even animation, it's right there. Like, here is right in front of you what's happening, but the great thing is what happened there, and then the reaction, and I have to fill that in, and sometimes that's more dramatic or more enlightening even than what we could portray.
Yeah, it's as a writer, sometimes I'm working in prose with no pictures, no images or anything, and sometimes I have to step back. Being someone who's worked in visual media so much, I have to step back and say, no, stop describing what this thing looks like to the reader. give them a feeling for it and let their mind fill in the details, because what they imagine is going to be probably cooler than what I think it should be, because it's
Right.
going to be filled in by what they think is cool.
Yeah.
And comics is kind of similar, because I think maybe it was Scott McCloud, I think that's, or maybe I forget, but it's what happens between the panels, what happens in the gutters. The reader has to fill that in, just like they do when they're reading a book, in a different way.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah.
movies and animation don't necessarily have that same fill in the details with your own imagination sort of thing. You just kind of let it wash over you.
So when you were, yeah, I agree completely, Brian. I think that there's a special place for sequential art telling that touches us viscerally, and not just visually but emotionally. That space in between the gutters is real.
Yeah.
What happened there? Yeah. So you're at school and you're doing 1990 video games, dude. You were ahead of the curve, man. That's
yeah. Back in 1990, 1991, I didn't even know that anybody made video games in the United States. It was all Nintendo. It was all Japanese stuff. It was Mario and Contra and all this stuff. Those are the games that I knew. I didn't at the time have a PC. I didn't know, like who Sid Meier was, who was making, like games like Civilization and Pirates and stuff like that. Yeah. I just thought all these games are made in Japan. And when a local company came to my school, I was like, what? And was immediately interested, because I was a huge gamer, and also had already been interested in game design, because I was playing paper and pencil games like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that,
Sure.
and making my own game systems and board games and stuff like that.
That's such a universal for world creators, for writers. This I think they're a majority of the writers I've spoken to, that the Dungeons and Dragons, the world creating games really had a draw for them. It was an outlet for their creativity before they began, or even as they were writing.
Yeah, I think it's very telling that I don't have any interest in playing as a character in somebody's paper and pencil role-playing game. I just want to be the game master. I just want to create the world and get people into it and have them go on an adventure, even today, when we do that sort of stuff. So,
Brian, are you an evil DM or are you a kind DM?
I'm a organic, story-based, whatever the players come up with, I'm gonna throw out what I thought we were gonna do and roll with it, so that we have a good adventure.
That's awesome.
I'm not the you enter a 10 by 10 room and an orc is guarding a chest and you just got killed by a trap. None of that stuff. it's more fun of as a storytelling. Everybody contributing to a story, and it's for a game master, for a game designer, for me, it's not really much fun if the player's just going through the hurdles that I set up for them. It's much more interesting for me when something comes along that the players come up with, and then all of a sudden you're like, that would be very cool. Let's do that instead. So
right. The line between the gutters, right? In the gutters, what happens between the panels. So going back to the player or the reader's imagination, you go those early video games, do you turn left or do you turn right? Those old PC gaming, and then it determined the next outcome. So there was a little bit of freedom from the player. And of course, now they're just ridiculous. I watch my 12-year-old son in the games he's playing, Battlefront and that, and I'm like, man, that's a long way from Pitfall on Activision that I was playing.
Yeah. The games that I'm into these days are open world games that just give you a world to explore. And it's full of content that has been curated for you, but they have what they call emergent gameplay is what I'm interested in. It's when an open world game gives you a bunch of toys to play with and gives you some content to do, but as you do it, you find out that all these different elements of the game are interacting with each other to create an adventure that even the game creator couldn't really tell you was going to happen.
They're very random. Which is
even though you're being funneled through content that they've set up for you.
Yeah, it's in a different adventure each time. Absolutely. So, when you were beginning, this journey on storytelling, who were some of your influences, Brian? Who did you look towards?
In terms of storytelling, when I was a kid, in terms of comics, when I was a kid, I was a Marvel reader. I was a Spider-Man reader. And somewhere along the line, probably in my mid-teens, I discovered Japanese comics. I discovered manga and Japanese animation. And so I started reading some of the stuff that was coming out at the time, stuff in the early 90s, like Marvel was reprinting the Akira comics. Miyazaki's Nausicaa was a huge favorite of mine. Battle Angel Alita, all those early black and white books that we were getting over here. Gunsmith Cats, stuff like that. Kind of a diverse fantasy, science fiction. Excuse me. Kind of
You're fine, Brian.
a diverse mix of science fiction, fantasy, and even just like Gunsmith Cats, which was just like, it's just two women in Chicago that are bounty hunters.
Yeah.
Which was an interesting read as someone who lived
in
or around the Chicago area. Being told by this Japanese creator, half a world away. That was some of the stuff that got me into, and still is an influence on my comics to this day. I still go back to those things that were formative, like we all do, that just really speak to, what we thought was cool when we first got into the medium.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I personally have, so for me it was Tintin and Johnny Quest and, these boy adventures, right? And I'm still drawn to those type of stories as a reader, But then, I got a little bit older and found indie comics and that also. But I feel like we're always chasing that first amazing experience that we had as readers or as fans. We want to recreate that. We want to feel that again.
Yeah, sometimes it's interesting to remember that you had things that influenced you or that you loved when you were a kid that you didn't really remember, and then to rediscover them as an adult. I realized not recently, but years ago, I realized that some of the first comics that I read that weren't sort of like superhero comics were actually reprints of Al Williamson's Flash Gordon stuff.
Oh, yeah.
He took over for Alex Raymond. And that stuff, I love that stuff. That has been a big influence on me. It pushed me into being a fan of Frazetta's work and, all these fantasy illustrators. And recently I just realized how much that one little pocketbook reprint of Flash Gordon in the 70s when I was like, 6 years old or 7 years old was a huge influence.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there it is. There's this moment and wow, it's influenced me. I didn't realize that. That's enlightening because I think we all have that. No matter what field we're in, I think we all find that inspiration. So as you're moving on, you're working in the video game field. Were you starting to formulate ideas? I know that you said eventually you said, wow, I really want to draw again. But were you always formulating ideas for books or things that weren't being used in the video game world?
So kind of what happened was when you're working in video games, you can't make every game that you have an idea for. There's just not enough time, not enough money. And some ideas are better than others for games. But I had some ideas that I came up with where I really liked the characters and I really liked the direction that it was going in, but it never got beyond a 2 or 3 pager concept. And several of those stories I've turned into comics. So my first comic was Soul Chaser Betty, and that was actually originally a video game concept. We even did a demo for it. We had several demos that we put together for it to try to sell it to publishers, and it just didn't take off, and we worked on something else instead. But I liked the characters and I liked the concepts. And years later, I pulled those concepts back out, and which had all started from one little sketch in my sketchbook where I was just sketching these little characters and I thought they were interesting. And I fleshed it out and turned it into a, almost 200-page graphic novel. And again,
you can see the influence there of both video game and, as you were saying, manga and Japanimation. You can see the influence as you read Soul Chaser, you can feel that for sure.
Someone keeps calling. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Bro.
Oh, good. Someone else got it.
Awesome.
So yeah, and then I'm working on the science fiction project that I'm working on right now. I've announced it on my website and showed some of the concepts for it, but I'm currently drawing the pages. It's called Salvage Hounds, and it's based on a concept for a video game that I came up with back in 2001, 2000.
Wow.
And I had drawn, some quick sketches of some characters and said put together this concept of this world and what you would be doing. But it was, just a rough concept. And it's stuck with me over all these years. And I recently thought, you know what? I think it would be really cool to take that concept and flesh it out and really build a science fiction universe for a comic book, which is very different than what I did with Betty, which was a fantasy horror comedy story that's set in, the 1980s. So I thought this would be a very different thing that I could do with spaceships and giant robots and stuff like that. It's been a lot of fun taking that off the shelf and revisiting those concepts, and then looking at the artwork that I did in 2001 and looking at the artwork that I do now and go, okay, I've made progress. I've definitely made progress. You never want to regress. You always want to be moving forward.
The teaser art is really amazing. Now, do you do your artwork on the computer, on like a Surface, or do you still hand draw?
Okay, so starting with Betty, I did all of the artwork for that graphic novel. I penciled it all in the meat world, as I call it.
Yeah, sure.
And then I scanned all that artwork in and I digitally inked and finished it. So having a background in video games, I'm very comfortable working with software, and I'm always, I know my way around Photoshop and just about every art program that's out there. So it's like, these are tools in my toolbox. I'm going to use them. And I really enjoyed digitally inking. But that was back in the days when I had a tablet that you draw down here and you look over here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a disconnect. It was very hard to draw, but I could ink and I could finish, color and stuff like that. So a couple years ago, I bought a Cintiq. Which is a monitor that you can actually draw on.
Yeah.
I was working with all of these artists at work, and I'm sitting there typing up design documents and stuff and looking at them drawing on these monitors and going like, oh, that looks really cool. I want to try that. And one of the artists let me sit down and try out the monitor one evening after work. And within a half an hour, I'm like, I got to have one of these. And that was several years ago, and I've been drawing digitally ever since. And so everything that you see for the character designs and mechanical designs and stuff that I'm doing for Salvage Hounds, all the drawn stuff, that's all digital. So my goal with drawing digitally is not to use cheats. It's not like I want the computer to do it for me. I went out of my way to find brushes and tools and programs that just let me draw exactly like I would on paper.
Yeah, because it feels that way. The characters feel like they were done on pen and paper. They don't feel sometimes, and it's gotten much better. But sometimes computer drawing can feel a little edged.
Yeah.
A little angular. This doesn't feel like that at all. The folds and the clothes, the roundness of the face, and the life of the eyes. It looks very neat, as you said. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate that. That's really my goal, is to find digital tools that just let me do what I do on a regular piece of paper with paper and pencil, but do it in the digital world, because the digital world does have a lot of advantages. It allows you to, create multiple, draw on multiple layers, to pick up and just move characters around in a composition, to just, try a different thing by turning off a layer and turning on another layer and just trying something new. And so I'm able to just work so much faster and iterate on designs and things so much faster. Even when working on pages, it's just so much easier for me to do that. And I think for me, it part of it is just, I have such a long history working with digital software that I was just comfortable with it. When I still like to work in the meat world. I still like to bust out pen and ink sometimes and do ink drawings, and I still like to draw on paper, but I really love drawing digitally. I think it's really something that I've gravitated towards.
Yes, it's the first person I saw doing it was Tom Nguyen, who's inked just about everything, and watching him a demonstration of the way it was done, and then so much as I've watched the art world change, and it's all right there. Coloring seemed common to me, but
yeah,
old school. And I doodle. I'm not an artist. I doodle, but it's like, wow, the things that they're doing now on a surface, or on, like you're talking about, the more animation stuff. Because I've seen those used for like drawing for animated feature films. They use that same type, right? Brian?
Yeah.
Yep. So, is there an opportunity by using that technology then to make short film, short action, or even full of your creations?
I've thought about it. It's like I have way more projects. Like any creator, I think I have way more in my head than I have time to do. I mean, I'm just as an example. I'm currently working on this new comic. I have commissioned illustrations that I'm doing. I have illustrations I want to do for fun. I'm working on writing a fantasy prose novel, and it's like I want to do. I actually have thought about doing a short, at least promotional animation to sort of get some of the characters from my comics out there. And I've even thought about doing them, especially for Soul Chaser Betty, which takes place in 1986, 1985. I've thought about doing it as video game art that would look like it came from 1985.
Oh, that would be so cool.
Yeah, which I definitely know how to do, because that's how I started. I started doing pixel art, these little tiny 16-bit characters. So
that would be really cool. And there's a bit of nostalgia for that too, from our age group that goes, oh, you rotten kids, you don't know how hard we had it.
Yeah.
My characters were square.
Yeah, I mean, I started out my career doing artwork for Super Nintendo games. It's crude by today's standards. And then 10 years later, it was nobody wanted to see that. Another 10 years goes by, and all of a sudden, everybody's like, hey, look at this thing. It's cool. It's retro. Let's make artwork that looks like it came from, 1990. And you're like, okay, cool. I guess, the stuff that I did before isn't, passe anymore. It's like, it all comes back around.
Yeah, everything old is new again. That the old saying. Yeah.
Yeah. I especially find it funny when I see kids coming at cons that are putting together sprite art things and stuff like that. I'm like, you weren't even alive when any of this stuff was going on.
Right,
but,
exactly.
That's awesome.
We just, my wife and I are such huge Mario fans, and we've told the boy repeatedly. We still have our 64, but we've told the boy about Mario 64, and now they're releasing it for the Switch. So now he'll have an opportunity to play that original game on his platform. So it's going to be kind of fun to watch him do that. Can we talk about Soul Chaser Betty and the story there? I think it's such an accessible world. Credit to you for creating an accessible world. I walked in when we had you come in. I walked in and looked, and I'm impressed, Brian. That is, if that's your first work, I want to dig deeper. But let's talk about the process of Soul Chaser and what brought that on. So,
because I had never done any comic book work before, other than that's not true. I had done comic books that will never see the light of day. When I was like 20, they're sitting in a closet somewhere, and it was stuff that you just work on. You don't even write it first. You're just like, I'm going to make a comic book and start drawing it. But it was the first comic that I tried to do as a sort of professional thing as an adult. And I recognized that I didn't have any experience really doing it. So for that book, what I tried to do was learn how to make comics. I took it as an opportunity to first and foremost, get myself drawing every day, because I had been out of the habit of drawing. So it was, drawing pages every day. It was drawing things that I don't normally draw. A comic book made me do that. So it was about, if you give me a piece of paper and say, draw something, I'm probably going to draw some cool warrior woman with no background and just like armor and killing a monster or something. So this was like, yeah, you need to draw backgrounds in a comic book. I'm like, what? Backgrounds? I have to do backgrounds? So
everything can't happen in the blizzard, Brian.
Exactly. So I really took it as an opportunity to get myself to draw and to learn sort of the medium of comics. I didn't want to try to break the medium of comics, or do something that was, avant-garde or anything like that. I really wanted to learn the meat and potatoes of how do you make comics with that book. So I stuck, with a contemporary setting for me. I started writing the book and I had the first issue drawn, 32 pages of the first issue drawn before I realized that, you know what, this story that I've written takes place in the 80s. I had set it as a contemporary story, but I realized that every story that you tell, there's a part of you in it. It's partly, autobiographical. There's some part of you in every character that you create. And Betty is a story of a bunch of teenage characters from the Chicagoland area, or she's from the Chicagoland area, who goes, into the country, into the South, and has this, adventure over the summer in the countryside. I was like, that's what I did when I was a kid. And I realized that, yeah, this was kind of similar to my experiences of summer vacations in the 1980s. So I retroactively went back before I published the first issue and rewrote it to make sure that it all could take place in 1985. Luckily, I hadn't added any cell phones or anything that I needed to take out, and so that's kind of where it came from. In terms of the storyline and the fantasy elements of it and stuff, those things I've always been interested in. I've always been interested in taking mythology from different sources and finding the common links between them and sort of using those to weave together a new sort of mythology. And so as you read through Betty, you'll discover that a lot of the creatures and monsters and things that are in the story all reference or come from actual world mythology from all over the world. And the story of it tries to sort of tie these things together to give sort of a common bad guy and threat to all these monsters.
Sure. I hope you take this in the complimentary way it's intended. It reads like, what if John Hughes was writing a quest story, a coming of age fantasy quest story. That's what it reads like. And I think that's that Chicago part of it, right? Hughes was from Chicago, so much of it was set there. There's that commonality of we're Chicago strong, this is who we are. But it reads like that. And when you said that that part of you, the biographic part of you was in that, it makes sense because she's a tough little chick, man. There's no doubt about it. She's pretty fearless. It's a great story arc watching her grow, but she's pretty fearless, the recklessness of youth.
Yeah, I'd like to describe Betty as being one part fearless and one part very what's the word I'm looking for? She's not very self-assured. She can be both at the exact same time, and I think that makes
vulnerable
her character. She kind of shies away from taking responsibility because she's not sure she can do it. But when she's roused to the occasion, no one can stop her. She's just very determined and headstrong. So especially when it comes to her friends and family being in danger. So
it's a beautiful coming of age story, Brian.
Thank you.
So you said that part of that Betty came from you and your experiences and summer trips and summer vacations. So as a male writing a female voice, which you do well, by the way, where do you reach for that? Where does that come from? What are you influenced from that?
So it's interesting because on my website I'm doing this series of blog post retrospectives about a game called SepterraCore. Mm-hmm. Which was a role-playing game that I did that came out in 1999. It was one of the first games that I got to work on where I got to create everything just whole cloth. The world, the characters, everything. Part of that retrospective, I talk about the idea of having a female main character. So this game had a female character that was the main character, and it was 1996 when I first started working on it. And if you go back to 1996 in video games and just flip through a video game magazine, everything in that magazine is going to be scantily clad women selling you video games. It was
objectified. Yep.
It was very much, video games were thought of as very much this boys thing. It's things for boys. You sell those to boys. And around that time, there were a lot of people trying to, figure out how to sell them to women. what nobody seemed to realize was that, women were playing these games too.
Yeah.
They wanted to play these games too. And for that game, I just wanted a female main character. And I think it came from a lot of the influences I had from Japanese animation. I had sort of grown up in my high school years reading things like Gunsmith Cats, or reading things like Nausicaa, The Valley of the Wind, or Battle Angel Alita. And these were all female characters. And it didn't even dawn on me at the time that somebody in marketing would say, oh, you can't have a female character. It has to be a male character. Boys won't want to play this game. They won't want to play a female character. And oddly enough, nobody ever stopped me. And that game went forward with the cast that it had, which was half, predominantly half male, half female. So I've sort of always just really been interested in writing women. I just enjoy stories that are good. It doesn't, from multiple points of view. I've always been interested in that as a reader. I've always been interested in that as a writer. So for Betty, it was just, for me, the character was, I wanted to make a character that was an interesting mix, like I said, of vulnerability and headstrongness, and wrap that up into someone who you wouldn't expect to be this avenging, demon-killing warrior, which is this, short, petite teenage girl. Yeah. And then surround her with people that, are also just sort of like everyday teens. They're not, it's not, an X-Man or, an Avenger or someone who's, bristling with, muscles and weapons and stuff like that. And so everybody underestimates that person. So that makes an interesting character for me to write, I guess. I think we are hanging up again.
So, Brian, one of the things that I see now in the books, especially having a 12-year-old boy, is that young adult genre has gotten so big, right? And what you were just talking about with teens and this unassuming, you were kind of ahead of the curve a little bit on that, or right in the middle of that. And that's become such a big genre right now. Is that going to be kind of, because I see that one of the leads in your science fiction is also going to be a female character, right?
Yeah. So the Salvage Hounds book, actually, I have four main characters. It's an ensemble cast of 4 characters. 3 of them are women. One of them's a guy, and that just felt right. They're all adults, though. It's not a sort of coming of age. They're all kind of ne'er-do-wells. Working maybe outside of the law on the fringes of the solar system. So they have history and past to them. But in terms of coming of age stuff, I think, sometimes coming of age stories are good stories to start with as a writer when you haven't done another, you're working on your first story, because you can draw on your own autobiographical, because everybody goes through it,
Right.
So not only do you have a wealth of material to draw upon, but every reader is a potential reader, because they've all gone through that journey too. So
right, it's a collective experience, right? It's shared.
I think one of the reasons, like you touched on John Hughes movies, like in the 80s, I grew up with John Hughes movies, and they're going to be, a lot of those types of movies are going to be timeless, because everybody likes to go back and remember, even when you're 50 or 70, people like to go back and remember what it was like, to go through those formative years. So
yeah. I was scrolling through, and something just caught my eye. I was looking at the Salvage Hounds, and I really, really like that art. Space 1999, and I just froze, and I'm like, oh my God, is he referencing Space 1999? Because so too few people remember that. It was such a great part of my late Saturday morning. It would come on where I lived in South Dakota, and it was, God, that was a fun show. It was, people forget about it or didn't even know about it, but what a blast of a show.
Space 1999 has the greatest theme song of all time. It's just completely out of left field. At the beginning of every show, there's like this just funky theme song that's awesome. But
yeah, it definitely feels the time, right?
yeah,
It's that.
I love the ship designs in that show.
Mm-hmm.
I grew
Mm-hmm.
up when I was a kid. I don't know how old I was. It must have been in the late '70s. I had an Eagle toy that was about yay big. That the front
Really?
the front cockpit and the back engine came off and connected together in the middle, and you could open the doors and put your action figures inside and stuff like that.
Oh,
And I don't
wow.
even know if I really knew the show at the time, or if I maybe saw it later when I was more of an adult. But those ship designs really stuck with me. They were very influenced by Kubrick's 2001,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
like on a television budget, and they're still phenomenal. The show can be
yeah.
goofy and weird, and it's about the moon being pushed out of orbit and traveling through the universe where they have adventures on these planets that they pass and stuff. But the ship designs are so just I don't know, they just feel grounded and cool.
Yeah, there's one that I have to wonder if it's in the public domain that someone could reach onto that and grab on and play with that. 'Cause that would be a fun world to play in.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
somewhere around here I have a little model of the Eagle that I got, a little one of those little die cast things, and
that's awesome.
yeah, I just love those.
That's a blast. Yeah.
I
So
referenced that in Salvage Hounds, by the way, because it was 1999 when I was actually working on the idea of it being a game. So it's been
okay,
since 1999, sitting in a folder
sitting
somewhere.
there.
Yeah, until sometime last year when I took out all that stuff and revisited and went, yeah, I think I do want to do something with this, and started working on the comic.
20 years it sat for you to
Yeah.
come back to.
Yep.
Wow. Wow. What gives you inspiration now? We talked about the early inspiration of Japanimation and manga, and of course the fantasy side of Frazetta and some of that. Where do you draw inspiration from now in your work?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, it's it's those things that you read or you watch, or that just make a huge impression on you. Uh, I, I I wouldn't sit there and just name stuff, but it's just like I'm
Yeah, yeah.
always, as a creator, I'm always like, I'll go to the movies with well, not these days, but before, go to the movies with
Mm-hmm.
friends, and watch a movie and come out of the theater and everybody be like, oh, I liked it, I didn't like it, what did you think about it? And I immediately have like, a 40-point, breakdown of like what I did like, what I didn't like, what I would have done differently. Um, so I'm always analyzing stories as I'm watching things, or reading
Sure,
things,
sure.
or even playing games and stuff like that. It's those things though that I think that really touch me when I get to the end of it and go, wow, I wouldn't have changed a thing. Everything was about it was perfect. And those are the things that really stick with you for a long time. Those things that you can unabashedly embrace and love without thinking, but if only they hadn't done this, if only there hadn't been that stupid joke, in that second scene, or, if only there hadn't been that plot hole that they failed to fill. So those,
Yeah,
those are, those are the things that I always look for.
yeah. It's funny. I asked Terry Moore the same question, and he said it's still Charlie Brown. It's still Peanuts. I mean, that sense of hope at the end. That
Yeah.
I'll get up. I'll get up no matter what. You knock me down. You pull the football. The Christmas tree falls apart. I'm still gonna get back up on Monday morning and try it again. That sense of hope and that sense of never giving up. And you can see the influence of the late 70s and 80s in your work, and I just was curious if there was something. Wow, that gun design, Brian, holy smokes. I don't mean to be distracted, guys. You need to go to Twilight Tangents and take a look at this and back this. Are you doing any type of Indiegogo or Kickstarter on this, or is this
So I haven't decided yet. So last
okay?
year I did a new Soul Chaser Betty story, Soul Chaser Betty and the Slumber Party of Doom. It's called. It's a 40-page standalone. And I thought about doing a Kickstarter for it, and realized that that Kickstarter is its own job, its own, like, you really need to know what you're doing and really do a good job at it. And it was just at the very beginning of the sort of convention season starting last year, and I realized
Sure.
that if I waited to do a Kickstarter, I wouldn't probably have books in hand to take to shows. So I didn't do a Kickstarter. For this one, I might do that. I'm not sure what form this Salvage Hounds book is actually going to take in the near term because of everything that's going on in the world right now. I don't know if I'm actually going to print physical books or if I'm going to, do PDFs online.
Just do digital. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I want to revisit the Kickstarter or Indiegogo thing again for that book.
Yeah. It's absolutely beautiful. You can see the video game influence on this, and actually I see a little Space 1999 in there on that ship design too. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
For sure. So Brian, you're going to run a special for us for SiouxperConline, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do 10%, is that correct? We're going to do 10% off coupon if you enter the code SIOux2020 on October 3rd and 4th. That's amazing. I hope that and we'll do everything we can to push people to your store. So I'd like to end.
I'll have a blog post on the website during the con that will have the coupon information and sort of direct people to all the different projects that I'm working on, and just sort of tell everybody who I am and where they can find out more information about some of the books.
Yeah, I jumped in and I really like Soul Chaser Betty, and I'm all in. I apologize that I keep looking over to my other screen, but this is really good stuff, Brian. I'm very impressed.
I'm having such a great time working on the artwork for Salvage Hounds. I really haven't shared any of the page art yet, and I really want to. Like this week, I worked on a splash page where I'm just like, I'm having such a good time working on this, and I want to share it with everybody. And I'm like, oh wait, no, that will ruin the story reveals. So no, I can't share that. So I have to. I'm so busy working on the artwork that I need to stop and sort of update the website and put some more stuff up there. But there is a couple posts up there right now that just sort of show all the character designs and ship designs. I'm doing these detailed ship designs in 3D.
The robots, all of it, The finished product of the team is really cool.
Thank you.
Love that we have characters of color, that we have different representation. It's very cool. It's very neat. So I like to end with a little quick fire. Those typical questions that you get thrown at you at every convention, so I might as well be the same.
Oh boy.
One character, anywhere, any universe, any place that you could write, who would it be? Not your own, someone else's.
If I could do any character, and this one's probably doable because it's public domain, I would totally do a Barsoom, Edgar Rice Burroughs, John Carter of Mars, Dejah Thoris thing, Mars Tarkus, Green Men of Mars. Love that stuff. Would totally do that. I want to make a video game set in that world.
That would be really cool. Bill Willingham said the same when I asked him this a couple years ago at SuperCon. He was just enamored with that world, and he wanted to touch on it a little bit in Fables and didn't get to that part of it. But I mean, even like Alan Moore touched on that in League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. That seems to be a universal. Yeah, that's a really cool. That's a great answer, man. Because it's fun, and a video game in that world would be
I would love it. You could jump 40 feet in the air and fight 16-foot green men and have a flying battleship, and that'd be awesome.
That would be a lot of fun. What book do you find yourself going back to?
Book that I find myself going back to. I'm a huge Tolkien fan. So I love The Lord of the Rings. I love the Silmarillion even more. I have a library of Tolkien books that is just enormous. I'm always going back to that well. To couple that though with, as a fantasy creator, I try to avoid doing anything even remotely like Tolkien in terms of, elves, dwarves, wizards and stuff like that. I'm like, nope. For me, the joy of creating new fantasy stuff is coming up with new things that hopefully people haven't seen before. So, but yeah, I love Middle Earth.
I'm a big fan of Tolkien. I'm also a big fan of Terry Brooks' Shannara world, and he kind of got destroyed for that. Like, this is just Tolkien light, and you're right. If you play in that, you're going to be compared to the master.
Yeah.
Right. It's very smart, very smart. One video game that you can only play one game for the rest of your life. What game is it?
Do I have other people to play it with?
No, just you. Well, let's do both. One just you, and then one other people. I'll give you one joint, and I'll give you one single.
Okay, so if I had just one game that I could play over and over and over again, I'd have to probably go with Robotron. Old arcade game. Yeah, love that game. I actually had the opportunity to work at a company with the guy who created that game, so that was a treat. If I could play a game and I had other people to play it with, I would play Bomberman 94, which was a Bomberman game made for the TurboGrafx that came out in 1994, and it is the perfect multiplayer. Everybody sits on the couch and grabs a controller and plays it at the same time. I would play that game forever. Just forever.
I want to go and grab that now.
Nobody will play it with me. Nobody will play it with me. For a couple reasons.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that game.
Nobody will watch The Breakfast Club with me, so I feel your pain. I have every line memorized, and nobody will watch it with me. I have to watch it by myself in my yearly viewing. Are physical arcades making a big comeback in the Chicago area?
You know, I know some people that are working on arcade games, and you know, that's kind of what they're either working on arcade games or pinball. There's been a big pinball resurgence over the last 7-8 years. Yeah, again, I got to work with a lot of pinball people at the last place that I worked at, so that was really a fascinating world that I hadn't really been a part of. I was in that generation of a little too young to remember when pinball was huge, but you know, I have some friends that are a couple years older than me, and they loved it. But yeah, I have some friends.
And pinball is the stuff, man. Pinball is it for me.
Yeah. So at the place that I was working at last, I worked with a lot of people that had worked in pinball or were working in pinball, and we had pinball machines in the office. So you just played them all the time, and I got But in terms of arcade games, I have some friends that are working on some arcade games, and interestingly enough, I think that they're working on ways so that you can play them in the arcade by hooking up your phone to play it, so touching the controls and stuff like that. You know.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I don't know if that'll go anywhere, but yeah, it's.
Yeah, retro arcades have made a huge comeback in this area and up through Minneapolis and down into Omaha. You know, adult-themed ones to capture the nostalgia of when you were a kid playing, and now they've just added bar to it. You know, and they've become a huge thing in this area.
In Chicago, we've got a couple barcades. There's one. We used to go to one called the Galloping Ghost all the time, and they just had just a rotating array of just different arcade games. And the ones that I found to be the most interesting were the ones like Robotron, where you put a quarter into these, you pay to enter the door. But you hit start, you get one life, and when the game's over, you're done. And the ones where you could just continue over and over and over and over again, like the beat 'em ups, like Turtles in Time or Golden Axe or stuff like that. They didn't really hold that much interest for me when they're free and you can just hit continue.
Go forever.
Yeah.
No, there's an urgency to that one life, that one time. That makes it more exciting. It pumps the heart up.
Yeah.
Brian, this has been a great conversation. I hope that I can get a commitment from you to come to SuperCon when we can have physical cons again. I'd love to have you. I'd love to introduce your work to more people. This has been a pleasure, man. I really enjoyed talking to you. Anytime I can get a Space 1999 reference thrown out there, and John Hughes in the same
1899?
1999. Space 1990. God, I hope I didn't slip. So anytime I had John Hughes and Space 1999 in the same conversation, this was cool for me, man.
This has been fun. Yeah, and I would love to check out SuperCon in the future. So we'd love to have
you.
I hope that the con scene resumes when everything is safe and ready to allow us to do that. So
that's the number one thing. As soon as they can get a viable vaccine out there, I think we'll be right back in business. We hope to be back in 2021. Again, the website is twilighttangents.com. Brian, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Stay
thanks
safe.
for having me. This has been great.
You bet. Bye now.
Bye.